Hello and welcome back to Curious Kellen. Today, I'm going to be telling you how I learn languages. So before I hop into exactly how I learn my languages, I'd just like to show you what languages I actually speak. So at the moment, I can speak French, German, Chinese, Spanish, a little bit of Arabic, and I'm planning on learning Russian later. And of course, I speak English. It's my native language. But I want you to know that I know a little bit about what I'm talking about here, and I'd say at the moment, German and French are probably my best two languages, followed by Spanish, Chinese, and then of course Arabic. It's what I'm learning right now. And I feel as though I've made a lot of progress in the past year, because when everything shut down for quarantine because of the coronavirus, my brother and I were at home. We were bored. We were trying to figure out something to do. I had already studied French for 2 years by then. I had forgotten most of it, unfortunately, and I was also studying German at the time in school. And so I had some experience with German. I felt really good with German at the time, and I decided, I want to learn languages because it's something that really interests me. It always had, but I had never really had the time, and now I had a lot of time. So my brother and I, we started learning Chinese together. When the summer rolled around, I decided, okay, I'm really enjoying learning Chinese, and I'd like to learn some other languages as well. So I decided to pick 6 languages that I feel were really important in the world, that had the most native speakers, that were the best lingua francas, or ones that I had already had experience in. So I decided I want to get back my French, I want to keep working on German, and I want to keep working on Chinese. I always wanted to learn Spanish, so I started learning Spanish, and then Arabic and Russian. Russian is a really great language because of the relations between United States and Russia, especially in the kind of the astronaut, for being an astronaut and aeronautics. That's really important because for the longest time, until that SpaceX mission that sent up the American astronauts fairly recently, all of it was done through Russian connections. So they would fly up in a Soyuz capsule to go to the International Space Station, and so you had to learn everything in Russian. All the American pilots, they had to learn everything in Russian. All the controls were in Russian. They'd communicate in Russian. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to learn Russian. And then Arabic, it's really interesting to me because of the way the script is written, and just because of the interesting sounds, and it really covers a wide variety of dialects and places in the world. So that's why I wanted to learn those languages. So after a little while studying these languages over the summer, I eventually came to the conclusion that I need to slow down my learning because I was studying all 6 at the same time, and I decided, okay, I need to take the time and just go one at a time and slowly kind of work through them and just cycle through that way. So at the beginning of this year, I started learning French again, and I spent 3 months learning French, and I kind of developed a method for learning my languages. I had kind of already started with Chinese and Spanish and German, which I studied a little bit the year before, but I feel like when I started learning French, that's when I really started to get a concrete idea of how I learn languages. So the first thing right off the bat is getting speaking. At the very, very first moment that you start learning, just start speaking and start exposing yourself to the language. So listen to music in the language, watch TV in the language. Even if you're watching in the language and you're watching with English subtitles or whatever your native language is, if you do it that way, then you're hearing sounds of the languages, and as you're learning, you'll start to notice, hey, I noticed that word. I noticed that word in the sentence. And you're not going to be able to understand everything all at once by any means. That's not going to happen, but you're going to start picking out words, and your brain is going to start thinking and recognizing when you're hearing the language that you're studying. So highly recommend listening to music. That's what I love doing, is listening to music in the language that I'm learning, and just generally exposing yourself to the language. And part of that is also speaking, because as you go through your day, there's just so many things that you can think about. You're thinking in your head all the time. Like you might think, oh man, I'm hungry, I could really go for a sandwich right now. You don't say it out loud, but you're thinking that in your head. Instead of just thinking, hey, I'm really hungry right now, I'll say out loud in the language that I'm learning, hey, I'm really hungry right now. And it seems like such a simple thing, but you're converting kind of your thoughts and your feelings into the language that you're learning. And so you're getting practice that way. That way, it's not necessarily that you have to talk and have a conversation with someone. You're practicing and preparing yourself for when you will eventually have a conversation with someone. So start speaking right off the bat and start exposing yourself to the language as well. Another thing I like to do is memorize words. I try and memorize 10 words every day during the week. On the weekends, sometimes I'll memorize some words, but mostly I'm just reviewing my words that I have memorized during the actual week. And the reason for doing this is it helps you recall specific vocabulary. So if you're trying to memorize words for different types of foods, different kinds of writing utensils, school supplies, whatever it may be, kind of this more specific vocabulary, it's really helpful. Now, you don't have to memorize every single word, because words like I, you, us, bread, water, things like that, you'll hear them so often in the language that you don't actually have to take the time to think and memorize them, because your brain and body will just naturally do it as you're exposed to them over and over again. So memorization is really important because it widens your vocabulary so quickly and allows you to talk about so much more. And the way that I memorize my words is I've actually read this book, Unlimited Memory, and it completely changed the way that I look at language learning, because you can memorize so many words so quickly and so efficiently too. You're able to recall them really well. And I'm actually going to make another video about the methods in this book, because I could go on and on talking about how I memorize words. So I'll make a separate video that goes in depth of how I actually memorize words and the way that I can recall words really quickly because of the methods in this book. But I think that memorizing in general, however you may do it, is really important for language learning. The next thing I want to talk about is resources. Now, a lot of the times people try to pick out the best resources to make sure that they're getting the best deal, getting the best content. And a couple places that you can do that is a website called All Language Resources. There's also fluentin3months.com. There's Coffee Break Languages. Those have some really great courses for languages, Coffee Break Languages. That's what I use to learn Spanish, Chinese, German, French. It's a great program, highly recommend. And then, of course, there's things like Duolingo and other apps that you can use. And what I've learned over my studying time is really just pick one, maybe two if you want to use two together, and just stick with it, because courses and resources approach languages in different directions. So you might kind of have a more linear idea for kind of going from learning the words like apple and orange and I and me, you, kind of going in that direction to kind of a more general, broader fluency. Some courses take you into a more conversational approach. So learning how to say, how are you? How's your family? Where are we going today? Things like travel. So there's so many different ways that these kind of courses try to approach language that it's really to your benefit to pick one and stick with it. Even if you feel like, maybe it's not the perfect one, it's a lot better to just stick with one instead of try and flip-flop between a bunch of different other ones to try and get the right one. So pick one, maybe two that you want to use together, and just stick with it throughout your language learning process. The other thing I do is I write in my journal. And this just gives me practice writing, especially if you're looking at more of a speaking approach. This isn't as necessary for you, but I find it's just really good practice for me every day, just to be thinking in the language that I'm learning and be writing in the language that I'm learning. When you're writing, the connection between your brain and your hand is it's very strong, and it allows you to kind of solidify vocabulary that you learned earlier in the day, help you with grammar, things like that. It's a really great way to practice the language that you're learning, especially if you don't have access to a native speaker or any speaker. You can practice by writing in this kind of journal. And I also, as you've seen on my YouTube channel, I make videos every weekend. Every weekend I sit down in front of the camera and I try and talk as much as I can, usually 5 to 10 minutes in the language that I'm learning, just to get some practice, because I can't always have conversations with native speakers, yada, yada, yada. It's a lot easier for me to just sit in front of the camera and talk a little bit in the language that I can, even when I don't know a whole lot to say. For example, in my first Arabic video that I made, I was only able to say like, how are you? This is my desk. Some very basic phrases, but it gave me the opportunity to practice. So writing in your journal, or even making a video log, a vlog, on your own YouTube channel, or just a personal one for yourself to practice, I would highly recommend doing that. And now, the number one thing for language learning: motivation. Motivation is the single most important thing when learning any language. If you don't want to learn the language, you're not going to learn the language. If you pay $300 to get a private language tutor and you're not motivated, you're not going to learn the language. So motivation is the number one thing. And that's like the number one thing for me for learning languages, is I want to be able to talk to people. I want to be able to communicate with people in the world. That's why I've been learning these languages, and that's why I've been succeeding. That has been my motivation, to talk with other people. So you have to find your motivation. You know, maybe you want to take a trip. Think about, oh, how am I going to plan out your trip? Think about, where am I going? What am I going to do? Let that be your motivation. Maybe you have a friend or a neighbor who speaks a language and you want to just be able to have a simple conversation with them. That is your motivation. The first thing you should do when you start studying a language is not figure out what's the best resources, what are the 100 most used words in that language. The first thing you think about is, what is my motivation? Why am I learning this language? And that, I can guarantee you, is the difference between life and death. If you have motivation, doesn't matter how many resources out there. If you're trying to learn a language that has only 100 native speakers in the whole world, you are going to learn it if you have motivation. If you don't have motivation and you're trying to learn a language like French that has, thousands and millions of native speakers, and even more speakers who speak it as a lingua franca, as a second language. And if you're not motivated, there's all these resources out there. There's a lot of money that you could put into it. But if you're not motivated, it's not going to happen. You're not going to learn it. So find your reason why you are learning languages. That is the number one thing to take away from this video. Thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope you learned something new and interesting, and I hope you have a little bit more motivation and inspiration to start learning a new language, or even continue learning the language that you're already learning. If you happen to find out what that motivation is and you want to tell me about it, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Also, if you have any questions about resources that I use, or my schedule for language learning in general, please feel free to ask me questions in the comments, because I'd love to help out in that way as well. When it's all said and done, that's really all there is to it for language learning. Of course, there's a couple other nuances that you can add in there, depending on what level you're learning at, and there's a whole lot of other things that go into it, but that is the main, those are kind of the main pillars of language learning. So thanks again for watching. Stay curious, everyone, and I will see you in the next video.